Coming up on today's message with Pastor Johnnie.
But I bring that up because if you are using Jesus to further oppress people, if you are using Jesus to take advantage of the poor, if you are using Jesus to take advantage of those who are captive, if you are using Jesus to further oppress people, you ain't worshiping the Jesus in the Bible, you're worshiping a Jesus of your own creation. He said he came to set liberty. He said those who were oppressed free. He came to heal the brokenhearted. He didn't come to further oppress people. Gospel according to Luke, the 4th chapter, 22nd through the 30th verse. Hear ye the word of the Lord. I'm reading from the New King James Version. Then he being Jesus, closed the book, 22nd, Luke 4:22 through 30. So all bore witness to him being Jesus, and marveled at the gracious words which proceeded out of his mouth. And they said, Is this not Joseph's son? He said to them, You will surely say this proverb to me, Physician, heal yourself. Whatever we have heard done in Capernaum, you do also here in your country. Then he said, Assuredly, I say to you, no prophet is accepted in his own country. But I tell you truly, many widows were in Israel in the days of Elijah, when the heaven was shut up, 3 years and 6 months, and there was a great famine throughout all the land. But to none of them was Elijah sent except to Zarephath in the region of Sidon, to a woman who was a widow. And many lepers were in Israel in the time of Elisha the prophet, and none of them was cleansed except Naaman the Syrian. So all those in the synagogue, when they heard these things, were filled with wrath. And they rose up and thrust him out of the city and led him to the brow of the hill on which their city was built, that they might throw him down over the cliff. Then passing through the midst of them, he went his way. God's word for God's people, and God's people said, Amen. You may be seated. Today's message title is Common Behavior, Uncommon Results. Common behavior, uncommon results. Something that is normal to do with people's behavior is that if they get too much of something, it is not having any kind of value to them anymore. If you buy an outfit at the store, even though they make more than one of that outfit, for some odd reason, if you go somewhere and you see somebody else with that same outfit on, it's lost a little bit of value in your eyes. Same thing with cars. If everybody driving the car you got, it loses a little bit of value. There are things that we don't want to do because we don't want it to become common. When you want to take somebody out to dinner, when you want to make it special, you take them somewhere they haven't gone over and over again. There ought not be anniversary celebrations at Burger King or McDonald's or Wendy's. I mean, unless you have some sort of significance to that. You know, my first date with my lovely bride was at Vietopia, and we also went to the museum, and then we also went to get some gelato. And so when I wanted to propose to her, we recreated the first date, going to those same 3 places over and over again, and at the end, I proposed to her. So you can go to common places when you want some sort of significance to it. But the point is if everybody got it, it don't mean as much to you. Same thing with people. When we think that something is common, we don't treat it the same as if it was rare. I would argue that on the job, that's why your boss don't come down to solve every problem, because they don't want to be common. But one of the places where we are often common is in our hometowns and with our families. I changed the diapers, boy. I wiped your spit out, girl. You can't get too uncommon with me. But the common behavior sometimes can also produce some uncommon results. What we expect to happen may not come the way we thought it was going to come. I thought about that in preparation for this sermon because Jesus was dealing with some common behavior and some people that thought he was common. What I read in your hearing was verses 22 through 30, but it's right on the back end of what he's done in 17, same chapter, but he basically goes to the synagogue, which was his custom. I'll say it again. Jesus goes to the synagogue, which was his custom. The third time's a charm. I'll say it again. He went to the synagogue, which was his custom, meaning Jesus, if we're going to be like church, if we're going to call ourselves Christians and be like Jesus, Jesus went to church often. And so he went to the synagogue, and before what I read, he went to the synagogue and he opens up Isaiah 61, the scroll, and reads it for the people. And it says, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he's anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor and has sent me to heal the brokenhearted and to proclaim liberty to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind and to set at liberty those who are oppressed and then to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord." He reads Isaiah 61 in front of the church that he goes to on a regular basis, rolls the scroll back up, sits down and says, "Today that scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing." Now I'm going to stop right there and point out something. He says, preach the gospel to the poor and to heal the brokenhearted and to proclaim liberty to the captives and set at liberty those who are oppressed. The poor, the captive, the oppressed. That is what Jesus said he came to do. Amen. The poor, yes. The captive, yes. The oppressed. That is what Jesus said he came to do. The poor, the captive, the oppressed. Those who are less fortunate than us. All over the Bible, James talks about taking care of widows and orphans. All over the Bible, Daniel and a couple other passages, they talk about taking care of the stranger, which would translate more to the immigrant. But I bring that up because if you are using Jesus to further oppress people, if you are using Jesus to take advantage of the poor, if you are using Jesus to take advantage of those who are captive, if you are using Jesus to further oppress people, you ain't worshiping the Jesus in the Bible, you're worshiping a Jesus of your own creation. He said he came to set liberty. He said those who were oppressed free. He came to heal the brokenhearted. He didn't come to further oppress people. So I wonder how these so-called Christians can blast immigrants. I wonder how these so-called Christians can say things about the poor and the homeless and those who are down on their luck. Yes. What Jesus are you worshiping? Amen. He said himself he came to help these people. All right. And so he tells them that what has happened, or what is happening in Isaiah 61 is what has been read, rather, in Isaiah 61 is happening right before their eyes, and then he rolls up the scroll and sits down. Okay. And at first they marveled at what he said. Oh, Jesus is eloquent when he was in the synagogue. But then when he went on ahead and told them that everything that this prophet told you was going to happen hundreds of years before I got here is now happening before your eyes, that he went from somebody who was eloquent to Joseph's son. Don't we know him? Don't we know where he's from? He can't talk to us like that. I was here when he went to school. I know him. He's from my neighborhood. Who he think he is? Everything went from uncommon to common now. When he started saying something that I would assume they didn't like, now he ain't all that. Now he Joseph's son. Now we know him. We know him and his people. And so he's identified himself, and he's saying that he is the Messiah that they wrote about. And they said, you can't, who you talking to like this, Jesus? You grew up around here. And so that's why he responds to him. This is what happens when he responds to him. He says that they all bore witness to him and perceived the marvelous words out of his mouth. Then he's Joseph's son. And he said, well, you'll say to this proverb to me, physician, heal yourself. Whatever you have done in Capernaum, do also here in this country, your country. And he'll say, assuredly, I say to you, no prophet is accepted in his own country. We do our own the worst. We do our own the worst. Amen. We get common with them. Because we saw them through this process. We think that they need to be in our own image and not in the image that God has called them to be. And Jesus was talking about it, and he talks about it also in the other Gospels, that he can't really do as much as he could at home because they don't have as much faith in him. Because he's one of their own. I used to get super frustrated when I would work audio-visual projects with people where I quote-unquote, grew up in the business with. Because I would watch, and I would they'd say, turn this instrument up, and I would turn it up. I'd go, if it was on 2, I'd turn it to 3 and 4 and 5, and they'd be like, I can't hear. You don't know what you're doing. Because I learned under them. And then an outside professional would come in, and he wouldn't have even touched it. Now I've turned it to 7. They can't hear. He'd keep it on 2, maybe notch it up to 3. That's perfect. And then when I got a little more experience under my belt, and I was no longer around the people I grew up under, I'd show up. And the person before me would be turning it to 7 or 8, and they trying to fire him, and I turn it to 3, and they love it. I've been on both sides, but that happens when we get around stuff, we get to taking it for granted. But nothing is promised. Tomorrow is not promised. We can't take tomorrow for granted. Our paychecks are not promised. Our pensions are not promised. Our homes are not promised. Nothing is promised. Our lives are not promised. We can wake up tomorrow short several family members. We got to hold on to what we have because nothing is promised. And he says that no prophet is welcome in his own country because they got common with Jesus. And while they liked him until he stepped on some toes, till he started talking about some things they needed to be doing if they were really believers. Instead of just talking about it, he showed them what they needed to do to be about it. And when he showed them what they needed to do to be about it, he went from this marvelous person in their eyes to just Joseph's boy. He identified himself. So he gave some illustrations. Let the church say illustrations. He gives 2 Old Testament examples that why he can't perform the miracles in Nazareth, and that he has other places before been able to perform these miracles. And then he went to other places after he left Nazareth and was still able to perform miracles, but he wasn't able to do it in Nazareth because those people didn't have that faith. Anytime there's a miracle to be performed in the Bible, I've yet to find a place in the Bible where some miracles got performed where somebody didn't have to follow instructions. Genesis to Revelation, anytime, even when Jesus turned water into wine, he told them to go get the water bottles. When God made Abraham a great nation, he told Abraham he had to get out of his home country, get out of his father's land in Genesis 12. Every time there was a miracle performed in the Bible, people had to do something on their own. It's not that God couldn't have just snapped his fingers and made whatever needed to happen, but you need to have some skin in the game. Never fails when I'm on the road. Never fails when I'm on the road. The car on the side of the road with the hood popped up and the people just sitting there, everybody go by. But if there's a car stuck in the middle of the street, and somebody hop out, they put the car in neutral, and they hop out the car and try to push the car somewhere off so they can start working on it, that car, multiple people will stop, pull over, and get behind that person and help them push it to where it needs to go. Because you had some skin in the game. You didn't just stay on the sidelines and say, oh, Lord, help me. What is I going to do now? You're trying to do something about it. And when you're trying to do something about it, more people are willing to help you. Now, investors, they're willing to help people who have already gone to other people and asked them for money. They're willing to help them. Jobs, you can't get hired if you ain't got no experience. You got to be able to do something. They don't want to take you all the way. They want to hook up to what you're already doing. One bishop said during the convocation of pastors of black churches, I'd rather hook my plow to a mule that is already pulling than one that is standing still. And there are some places in our lives where we need to move on. We're looking for some help, but in order for us to get that help, we need to start trying to pull on our own so people can pull with us instead of looking at the situation and realizing I ain't finna pull all that in my whole self. If he can't pull it himself, if she can't even start pulling it herself, why should I come around and help? We ought to be the change that we want to see in 2020. There are some things that are sitting around that are standing still that we need to practice some common behavior. That common behavior of getting started instead of waiting for somebody to start it for us. And so Jesus tells them that there were many widows in Israel in the days of Elijah. And there was a woman, a Sidonian woman. And at that time there was famine. And the man of God, Elijah, at first had to get fed by ravens. And then later on, he got sent to a Sidonian woman's house. And this Sidonian woman, even though, to understand the story in your own study time, you can go to 1 Kings chapter 17. And if you go to 1 Kings chapter 17, the story between verses 7 and 24 talk about Elijah going to this Sidonian woman's house. And first, there is a famine in the land. He's fed by ravens first. God still provided even though there was a famine. And then he got sent to the Sidonian woman's house. And even though there was a famine across all the land, the man of God said he was hungry and she gave of her own food. She was in lack, but she still gave to the man of God in lack. And not only did she still give to the man of God in lack, she was a Sidonian woman. She was an outsider. This was not a natural-born Jew that was on the inside, that was on the in crowd, that was on the well-to-do. And not only did she give out of what she had, she worked with what she had, and she worshiped. Even though there was a famine in the land, even though the economy was bad, even though it had not rained in 3.5 years, she still worshiped. And not only did she still worship, she still worked with what she had. And because she worked with what she had and she worshiped, during the middle of the famine, her son died. The Elijah came and brought her son back to life because she worked with what she had and she worshiped. It don't cost anything to work with what we have. It don't cost anything to worship. You can do all that with no matter what is going on. Whether you are in the valley, you can worship and work with what you had. Whether you're at the peak of the mountain, you can worship and work with what you have. Whether you got friends for days or no friends at all, you can worship and work with what you have. So he mentions Elijah, and then he also mentions Elisha. Because there were plenty of people that were with leprosy during that time. But we hear about the story about Naaman. And to look at that story, you go from 1 Kings 17 to see what's going on with Elijah and the widow. But you go to 2 Kings chapter 5 to look at what happened with Naaman. And Naaman was working for the king of Aram. He was a general. He had position. He had power. He had prominence. He was a well-to-do man, but Naaman still had one problem. Naaman had leprosy. And so no matter how high he had reached, he was still a leper. They could use him for military battles and strategy and leading the people, but he still had to walk around saying, unclean, unclean. Because people didn't want to touch someone with leprosy. That was a terrible skin disease at that time, and they had not come up with a cure. So here he was with all his position and his prominence and his power, but he was still lower. He was still common in one area of his life. And so he heard that there was a possibility that he could be healed of this leprosy. And so the king of Aram sent a letter to the king of Israel, letting him know that he was sending his military general to be healed. And the king of Israel was like, no, this is a trap. What you sending your military general over here for? No, that's not what happens. But the word got to Elisha, and he said, no, send him so that they can know that there is a prophet in Israel. Let him know that there's somebody that can speak truth to power. Let him know that there's somebody that can speak to that situation. Even though he had an incurable disease by modern medicine at that time, let him know that there was somebody that could speak to his situation, somebody that could go to God on his behalf, somebody that could heal him. Let him know that no matter what you're going through right now, there's still a prophet in Israel for you. So he sent a letter. And then Naaman got nice. He got fresh for the trip. He got out his finest garments. All right. He had 10 talents that he brought with him and 6,000 shekels and all of these things that were going on. And he brought them on for his trip to Israel so that Elisha could heal him. And I went to look it up because I was like, what's the big deal about 10 talents and 6,000 shekels? Well, to translate it to modern day time, 10 talents would be about $15,000 to $16,000. Okay. And 6,000 shekels would also be somewhere between $13,000 to $14,000. I know that's light money for some of y'all around here, but that's what he put together to travel to the place and all the finest garments. And he went to Israel and went to Elisha's house. And Elisha didn't even come out to see him. And Naaman had the nerve to get mad because he traveled all that way, put on his fine garments, had all kind of money and gifts, had a letter from the king, and he wouldn't come out to meet him. Naaman would be what we would call the pastor-only crowd. It's finna get quiet in here in a moment, but it's finna get. So Naaman got mad because the prophet did not come out to meet him directly. Pastor-only crowd. Okay. If pastor ain't called me, it don't count. If pastor ain't come to visit me, it don't count. Pastor ain't taking me to lunch. Pastor ain't taking me to coffee. Pastor ain't coming to visit me first. It don't count. That ain't my pastor. My pastor is lazy. Naaman was a part of the pastor-only crowd. He thought because of his position and prominence, he thought because he was a military general, he thought because he came with a letter from the king, he thought because he had all that money that he should be greeted personally by the pastor. Don't send nobody else out to tell me what to do. Don't you know who I am? I built all this. How dare you miss out on me? How dare you not come and meet me at the door? Naaman was a part of the pastor-only crowd. Elijah sent one of his assistants out and said, tell him go dip himself in the Jordan 6 times. And he'll be healed. We're some pastor-only people. As if there's nobody else that can pray for us in our time of grief. There's nobody else that can visit us in the hospital. There's nobody else that can sit with us in a time of trouble. Pastor only. How dare he not come out and meet me? But he still went and dipped himself in the pool. Well, first when he told him to go to the Jordan, he was like, well, I got to go to the Jordan. I passed some much cleaner rivers to come down here to not get visited by this pastor. There are cleaner rivers before I got here. But Elisha told him to do something common. Because he was going to do something common to get some uncommon results. He wanted the pastor to come out and heal him. He said, nope, just go to the River Jordan and dip yourself 6 times, and you're going to have skin like a young man. And Naaman got mad and headed home. But thank God for people who are common. Because one of his assistants ran to catch him. One of Naaman's assistants ran to catch him and said, if he'd have asked you to do something great, you'd have done it. But because he asked you to do something simple, you got mad and headed home. And so he went to dip himself in the water. And he dipped himself in the water 6 times. Had to dip it 6 times. 5 was not enough. And 7 would have acted like God needed help. But he followed those instructions, and when he came out of the water, he came out of the water a new man, baptized, new skin like a baby, because he had done what the person said. And here you have these Old Testament problems that are going on, and those things that they are going on become something that is mentioned with Jesus to the people who have gotten too common with him. Sometimes if you want to go to the next level, you need to be able to be willing to do the common things and do the common things consistently. It doesn't have to be big. We don't have to get a plaque and put your name on it. We don't have to have a whole service to honor you and give you food with the fried chicken and the green beans and the potato salad. We don't have to come up with a trophy to present. Sometimes in order to do things, you got to not be willing to have your ego stroked. And there were plenty of people that had leprosy at that time. But this is the story that made it into the Bible. And this is the story that Jesus taught. There were plenty of people that were struggling during the famine. But this is the story that Jesus ended up talking about and letting them know, you're getting a little too common with me. And the things that you are supposed to be doing, and there are things that are going on that are happening, and there'll be plenty of people that will have this problem, but only a handful of people will be saved from these problems, because there's only a handful of people that are willing to do the things to get it done. Amen. And he told them that after telling them they need to be taking care of the poor and the oppressed and the captive, and they need to be doing the common things, because everybody, while it is available for everybody, it's not effective for everybody, because everybody's not willing to do what needs to be done. Amen. I wonder about the number of people who were given instructions by people in the Bible and did not follow them, and now we never know about their miracles because they never had them? What if Naaman had never gone to the River Jordan? What if the Sidonian woman had not given the prophet any of her food? I'm check to check. Me and my son, and we done. We done here. What if the people had not given the bottles or the jars of water to Jesus to get them turned into wine? What if Abraham had not gotten out of his country? What if we had not followed these common instructions to bring a miracle? But they were so mad that they tried to kill him. They tried to take him to a hill and throw him off a cliff. But because he still had work to do, he did something super common and walked right through them. And nobody was able to lay a hand on him because it wasn't his time. They weren't at Calvary, so it wasn't his time. Nobody had a crown of thorns to put on his head, so it wasn't his time. Nobody had a cat of nine tails over there, so it wasn't his time. He was able to walk through them and head out on his way. There was work to be done. There were more blinded eyes to be opened. There were more dead people to be raised from the dead. There were more people to be healed of leprosy. There were more people to be fed with 2 fish and 5 loaves of bread. There were more people to have these breakthroughs and be cleansed of demons and work through and get their healing. Because it was not his time. And so he went upon his way. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, the doors of the church are open, and we invite you to come.
Thank you for listening to this message. Be sure to subscribe to us on YouTube, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, or wherever you found this message. If this message blessed you, be a blessing to someone else and share it. Connect with Pastor Johnnie on Instagram and Twitter, and be sure to like Faith UMC Dickinson on Facebook.